the 80s and early 90s, kids were gripped with turtle fever because of the highly successful Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. What started as a one-shot comic morphed into a pop culture powerhouse fueled by a popular cartoon and merchandise galore. Even today, TMNT is still a juggernaut. My introduction to the Heroes in the Half Shell was through TMNT 2 Secret of the Ooze. I watched the movie repeatedly as a kid, and I don't care what anybody says, that movie is a 10 out of 10 in my book.
He's right.
I would eventually watch the other movies and TV shows via library and Blockbuster rentals, but I never played any of the games. During the Turtles' peak in the 80s and 90s, Konami released several games for the arcades, consoles, and even handhelds. Ask anybody from that time about TMNT video games, and they'll wax nostalgia about how awesome the arcade game was and how the NES game taught them that turtles can't swim.
Shredders my ass and splinters my balls.
Then in 2022, Turtles fans got not one but two Turtles games with the release of TMNT Shredder's Revenge, followed by TMNT The Cowabunga Collection later that year. As someone who was born after the Turtles' golden age, I was always curious about how good the original games were, and thanks to the Cowabunga Collection, it's easier than ever to play the originals on modern hardware.
Let's kick shell!
TMNT The Cowabunga Collection compiles together 13 TMNT games, including TMNT The Arcade Game, its sequel Turtles in Time, and all the games released for NES, SNES, Sega Genesis, and the Game Boy. What makes this collection unique is it features every version of the game released. For example, you have the original arcade game in its NES port, as well as all three versions of TMNT Tournament Fighters. Plus, Digital Eclipse includes the option to let you switch between the North American and Japanese release of each game. With a few exceptions, almost all the titles are brawlers. You'll slash, kick, and punch your way through waves of foot soldiers and take on classic villains like the Shredder, Krang, Bebop and Rocksteady, and Baxter Stockman.
Hey, Krang! Bring that statue back, you bloated beanbag!
As a tribute to the source material, the Cowabunga Collection is impressive. Besides the games, there's a cornucopia of TMNT memorabilia to dive into. There are instruction manuals to read, artwork to gaze at, and you can even read the original design documents used during development. Even if you only have a passing interest in the franchise, you can appreciate how much effort was put into the historical value of this collection. The only minor disappointment is the fact they didn't include episodes from the shows or actual comic issues. Instead, you get a slideshow recap of each series and the comic covers. This was likely done because of licensing issues, but even then, this is still a great museum of all things TMNT.
Cowabunga!
When it comes to retro game compilations, the question is always how do these 30 going on 40-year-old games hold up? With some compilations, they use quantity over quality to hide the fact most of them have aged as well as a box of TMNT cereal. With the Cowabunga Collection, Digital Eclipse strikes a fine balance between quantity and quality. While some games have aged better than others, none of them are outright terrible, and the quality of life features they implemented makes playing these games easier than ever.
Hang on, guys!
Of the 13 games available, my personal favorites were TMNT The Arcade Game, Turtles in Time, and the original NES game. TMNT The Arcade Game is a classic side-scrolling beat-em-up. You select between 1 of 4 turtles and go on a quest to save New York from the nebulous Shredder and Krang. The gameplay isn't mind-blowing, but it's a lot of fun, not to mention challenging. Each turtle has their own weapon, move list, and special ability. Leonardo has his katanas, Donatello has his bow staff, Michelangelo has his nunchucks, and Raphael has his sai. Donatello's bow staff is great for keeping enemies at bay, but playing as Michelangelo or Raphael forces you to fight close quarters since their weapons have little range. Every stage ends in a boss fight. These fights are long, and it's easy to slip up and take lots of damage. It's a short game, but the challenge factor is high. If you think fighting Shredder is tricky when playing solo, wait till you see what it's like when 4 players are facing him. TMNT The Arcade Game is fun, but TMNT Turtles in Time is awesome. The flying is more responsive, the level design is varied, and it has a gonzo plot where the turtles fight their way through the past, present, and future to stop the Shredder. Several fans cite this one as the best TMNT game, and for good reason. It improves and expands upon the original, it has a lot of personality, and it's just a great brawler. The SNES version is a fantastic port. While it loses the original's 4-player co-op, it adds new levels and bosses, making this version as good as its arcade counterpart.
Cowabunga!
All I had heard about TMNT on NES was that it was challenging, so when playing it for the first time, I was surprised to discover how good it was. It's less a brawler and more an action-adventure game. You explore areas to find items and save the Turtles' friends from Shredder and his cronies. You'll fight the Foot Clan, Mousers, Dr. Salvador from Resident Evil 4, a fire guy, and several other weird and unusual creatures. Instead of playing as one turtle, you swap between the 4 via the pause menu. The turtles double as lives, so if you lose all 4, it's game over. I found Donatello to be the most useful because of his bow staff's ridiculously long range. You can pick off most enemies and bosses with ease. Like the arcade games, playing as Raphael or Michelangelo makes it more difficult. Ditto for Raphael, whose Sai has a ridiculously short distance. The turtles' movement is floaty, but it's not too floaty that it becomes frustrating. What is frustrating is the dam level where you need to defuse bombs while avoiding hazards and dealing with the stiff swimming controls. Goddamn, is this dam level hard. Otherwise, I really enjoyed TMNT on NES. The rest of the lineup is good. TMNT 2, the arcade game, is the NES port of the first arcade game. It preserves all the arcade action in 8-bit form, though I found it to be more challenging than the arcade original. There are fewer health items available, so you need to be more careful. TMNT 3, the Manhattan Project, offers more of the same, while TMNT, the Hyperstone Heist for Sega Genesis, is a reimagining of Turtles in Time. Shredder has shrunk New York City, and it's up to the Turtles to return New York to its original size. Despite the change in setup, the gameplay is the same as it was in Turtles in Time, though it does feature different levels and villains, like Tatsu from the live-action movies. Unlike the other games, TMNT Tournament Fighters is a fighting game. The setup is slightly different between the 3 versions. In the NES version, the Turtles fight each other to see who is strong enough to take on Shredder. In the SNES version, you pick a turtle and fight different opponents to save Splinter and April from Karai. Finally, the Sega Genesis version sees the cast fighting their way through Dimension X to save Splinter. Full disclosure, I'm not the biggest fighting game fan, so apologies in advance for the footage where I get my ass handed repeatedly. What I can say is that Tournament Fighters is good. It's no Street Fighter, but it's a fun enough fighting game, regardless of what version you play. Rounding off this collection is the 3 TMNT games produced for the Game Boy, and in my opinion, they're the weakest ones. Fall of the Foot Clan and Back from the Sewers are simplified versions of the beat-em-ups found on arcades and consoles. You move from level to level, smacking foot soldiers and other enemies when they pop up. On the one hand, these games give you turtle action on the go. On the other hand, they're basic beat-em-ups that get repetitive fast. The third game, Radical Rescue, is a welcome change of pace. It's a Metroid-style adventure where you explore levels to find the turtles and use them to discover new areas and gear. It's a great concept, but what sours the execution is the respawning enemies. Even if you go off-screen for a second, the enemies respawn. This makes the game challenging, but not in a good way. It's hard to make progress when the turtles are taking unnecessary damage all the time. Of all the games in this collection, Radical Rescue is my least favorite. It's less radical and more tedious.
Who put the lights out?
Digital Eclipse implements several modern-day comforts that makes playing the classics more palatable. From a quick save option to a rewind feature, there are a lot of ways to tweak and enhance each game to your own liking. You can play the arcade games as is, or give yourself multiple lives with a few quick taps of the start button. Several games can be played online. You can either create your own lobby or jump into an active game. As cool as it is, its implementation is spotty. I ran into lag several times during my playtime, and it got so bad that it turned some matches into a slideshow. When it's running smoothly, it's great, but when it's lagging, you may experience a headache or two.
Thank you, my turtles.
When it comes to the graphics and audio, it's fantastic. The sprite-based artwork found in each game is excellent, and it's a testament to the timeless nature of 8-bit, 16-bit visuals. The menus are well designed. I love the little flourishes they added, like surrounding each game with comic book panels or using the turtles later as the in-game museum. The mini guides they made for each game emulate a classic strategy guide, and they're littered with loads of little in-jokes and references. The audio is great. Like the visuals, the chiptune music holds up well and is incredibly catchy.
I owe you one.
TMNT The Cowabunga Collection is a solid tribute to the franchise and the games that spawned it. It's filled with loads of TMNT paraphernalia and serves as a great history lesson on the Turtles. As a retro game compilation, it's good. Most of the titles are great, some are fine, and a few are okay. The slew of enhancements makes the punishing difficulty easier to handle. Being able to save on the fly is a godsend given how challenging these games can get. Also, it's surreal knowing we live in an age where we can play old Sega and Nintendo games on our PlayStation, Xbox, or Switch, complete with local and online multiplayer. Whether you've been a fan since the beginning or are just getting into the Turtles, you'll enjoy what the Cowabunga Collection offers. TMNT The Cowabunga Collection gets an 8 out of 10.
Pizza power!